the past 4 months, we have traveled to 4 countries in 4 different continents. This whirlwind trip around the world has exposed us to a variety of cultures and perspectives. No matter where we went, from cities to rural villages, transportation has been a constant indicator of the pace of life in any setting. Mobility is an essential part of life, which at many points determines people's ability to access resources and thereby impacts their overall quality of life.
We learn to watch the movement of cars across streets, to listen to people talking about transportation in their daily conversations, in order to hear the underlying pulse. In DC and Brazil, the hissing sounds of metro trains hurtling across rails underneath crowded streets. In Vietnam, the honking of buses and motorcycle horns. In South Africa, the slow slapping of flip-flops against dirt roads.
We noticed how big of an impact infrastructure had upon people's behavior within any transportation system. In DC and Sao Paulo, which have fast and smooth-running subway systems, people opted to use mass transportation far more frequently than in Hanoi and Islington, where such transportation systems were considered to be unreliable and inconvenient to use. While in Hanoi, the problem was linked to the nature of the infrastructure, the fact that it was on the ground and therefore vulnerable to external issues such as traffic congestion. The problem in Islington was the raw infrastructure itself, such as the constant breakdowns and delays in the train system, or the limited number of buses or vans which could transport users from city to city, which led to a reliance on taxis.
System planning was closely tied to infrastructure. Without adequate planning, even strong infrastructure could not be effective. For example, even within the strong mass transit systems of DC and São Paulo, there was a user bias toward subway transport over bus transport due to the perceived simplicity of that system's routing. In these cities, we also observed some dissatisfaction with the limited hours of operation of these systems. Users wanted to be able to use these transportation systems late at night, when they were returning home from work or socializing with friends. In Hanoi, the lack of established route schedules for the extensive bus system led to users perceiving this form of transportation as unreliable and inconvenient, in spite of its strong infrastructure, namely staffing and buses which ran smoothly.
In Sao Paulo and Hanoi, traffic congestion was a huge influence upon user choices. By making streets harder to navigate, traffic forces users to take the fastest route. In Sao Paulo's case, that was sometimes mass transport such as the metro, which moved underneath the congested streets. And in Hanoi, that meant using motorbikes, which were more nimble and able to move quickly with the stream of traffic. This is a difficult problem to remedy. Increasing the number of people using mass transit would help, but people are less likely to use mass transit, particularly in above-ground systems such as the bus system in Hanoi, when congestion exists. The governments of both countries have intervened in various ways. In Sao Paulo, the driving restriction where people are not allowed to drive one day of the week during peak traffic hours, and in Hanoi, the policies which attempt to decentralize the city and improve roads. But none of these interventions focus on the mass transit systems. For example, building skyways in Hanoi for mass transportation, or extending the operational hours of the Sao Paulo Metro. An increase in the use of mass transport would also reduce the volume burden on these cities' roads.
All in all, when it came to systematic issues such as infrastructure or planning, the biggest motivation for individuals' choices was always convenience, or the ability of users to be as mobile as possible given whatever circumstances the system placed on them. If these cities hope to reduce the burden upon their transportation systems by increasing the number of users choosing mass transport systems such as the metro or buses, the biggest way in which they can encourage such actions is by listening to their population's needs and responding to what they hear, by making their systems as convenient as possible. This will transform these systems into more attractive transportation choices for individuals.
Social influences on transportation, specifically the prestige and status associated with the ownership of cars, is an issue which is more difficult for government policy to address or to change. We ran into this phenomenon in every city outside of the U.S. where we traveled, and the social capital available through purchase of perceived luxury products such as automobiles is perhaps a reflection of these countries' recent ascent to middle-income GDP per capita and thriving markets, which leads to a consumption-driven focus in society as people get wealthier. That said, it is important to note that when it came to the question of social status, convenience was still the dominant motivation. For example, a skateboarder we interviewed in Sao Paulo told us he would take his date on the metro, even though it wasn't the nicest form of transportation, he said. It was affordable for a student, fast, and convenient. Therefore, we feel that governments don't necessarily need to address the issue of cars as a status symbol in any way. By simply improving mass transit systems' convenience, they can affect change in individuals' behavior.
In addition, the fact that DC was alone in its view that cars are not a huge symbol of status cannot be tied to its higher GDP per capita and the greater prevalence of car ownership alone. In addition, this city showed a higher degree of environmental awareness around transportation. For example, some of the city's buses used environmentally friendly fuel, and most of all, the city's bike-sharing program is now one of the few worldwide examples of this environmentally friendly system of transportation. As car ownership becomes less exclusive in these other cities and mass systems of transport become even more convenient, we anticipate that the social pressure around transportation choices will begin to fade in São Paulo, Hanoi, and Islington.
Another issue that was prevalent only in certain cities was concerns around safety of transportation systems, and this was an issue that seemed to develop along a spectrum in relation to how developed the systems in question were. In DC, we heard no concerns about safety. Even for bikes, there are trails where riders can safely travel around the city rather than being surrounded by cars. In Sao Paulo, we didn't hear safety concerns around the transit system itself, but rather the surrounding city. Specifically, people were worried about crimes and robbery. In both Hanoi and Islington, concerns about the education of drivers using the system were most prevalent. In Hanoi, people worried that bus drivers could be dangerous due to their lack of training. And in Islington, taxi drivers were notorious for their poor driving skills.
As we finish our journey around the world, we have gained immense insight into the reasons individuals make the transportation choices which they do. Though other factors such as environmental awareness, safety, and social status play a role in these behaviors, the biggest contributing factor by far is convenience. We have also reflected upon how this simple decision, which each individual makes, when multiplied by thousands of users, can create huge impacts on the transportation systems in each city. In DC and São Paulo, convenience drives a huge usage of the metro. In Hanoi, the most convenient form of transportation are motorbikes. And in Islington, taxis are the predominant way for people who do not own their own cars to travel.
Now that we've seen a snapshot of these 4 places in the present, we are left with some huge questions for the future. In DC, the growing costs of maintenance for a well-run mass transit system is the source of future concern, as evidenced by the many briefs and cost-benefit analyses published by the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. For Sao Paulo and Hanoi, where the mass transit systems are owned and managed by the government, the biggest problem to be addressed in future years is the issue of traffic congestion. And for Islington, it is critical that the government plays a greater role in ensuring that the rural areas of South Africa have transportation systems which provide them with countrywide mobility in order to access resources such as education and jobs.
As these cities move forward in their economic development and rise in international stature, their transportation systems must grow as well to keep up with the rising demand. Each of these 4 places face their own unique constraints and circumstances. Only by paying close attention to the distinct rhythms of each location can governments and other actors in the transportation sector hope to design systems which satisfy these populations' needs.